first thing we must do is break the keyboard into smaller chunks, and this requires us to be able to see a pattern of 12 keys which repeat along the keyboard. To start seeing this pattern, we have to locate 2 black keys. We are going to start at the middle of the keyboard for right now because the ends of our keyboards may be different. When we look at the keys, we'll notice that all the white keys stick out farther and the black keys sit back, coming in groups of 2 and 3. Let's take our left hand, extend 2 fingers, and play the 2 black keys. Surrounding these 2 black keys are 3 white keys. They stick out further. Altogether, these are only 5 of the 12 keys we need to have. To find the other 7, we should take our right hand, extend 3 fingers, and play the 3 black keys to the right of the 2 that we have already found. These 3 black keys are surrounded by 4 white keys, which all combine for a total of 12 keys. If we remove the bottom of the white keys instead of seeing the keys as separate, we can tell that they're all sitting directly next to one another, which is really important to understand. The white keys sit out much farther, which will help us in the next section, but it's critical to realize that the black keys and white keys aren't separate at all. They're right in between each other. We call this group of 12 keys an octave. If we take this octave, make another one, and put them side by side, we get a keyboard. This is also how the fretboard on a stringed instrument is set up, and this is why guitars have the double dot. This is where the octave begins again. We can add another octave, and another, and another, and then we have a 5-octave keyboard which is the same size as mine. Except there's one little problem when we get to the right end. My keyboard has 1 extra key. Some of you will have extra keys down on the left, and you will have a single black key which doesn't belong to any group of 2 or 3. What about these odd keys? How do they work with octaves? No matter what your keyboard looks like, it's always a bunch of octaves side by side. So I can add another octave and ignore the other 11 keys since they don't actually exist on this keyboard. Some of you may have keyboards that start off with 3 extra keys. We do the same thing. Add an octave and remove the keys that you don't have. Now that we've broken the whole keyboard down into octaves, we need to start understanding the 12 keys, and the best way to start doing that is by giving them names. We're going to call the 5 black keys sharps and flats for right now, and move on. The white keys are called natural notes because they aren't sharp or flat, and they get their names from the first 7 letters of the alphabet. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Most people would assume from here that the first white note in the octave is A, but it isn't. The first white key is actually C, followed by D, E, F, G, and then the note after G is now A, and then finally B. If you have a keyboard unlike this one, which has the 3 extra keys at the left, your starting note is A. My keyboard, however, starts on C and also ends on C. Why don't all keyboards start on A? C is the easiest place to start learning key formulas, which will allow us to start on any note, to figure out scales and chords. But before we learn a formula, we need to learn the real names of the black keys. Earlier we just called them all sharps and flats, but which ones are sharps and which ones are flats? That depends on which way your hands are moving along the keyboard. If we're playing from the left and go to the right, they're sharp. If we're moving in the opposite direction, they're flats. It's a weird naming process that makes more sense if you're reading sheet music. Each key has to have its own name though, right? Kind of. When we're playing left to right, they're sharp notes, and they borrow their name from the white key that came before. So the first black key is C sharp, then D sharp, then we have F sharp, G sharp, A sharp. The opposite happens when we start going back down the keyboard. The black keys now become flat, and borrow their names from the keys which came before. So the A sharp is also B flat, G sharp is A flat, F sharp is G flat, D sharp is E flat, and C sharp is also D flat. Sharp means move right by 1 key, flat means move left by 1 key. But what about these white keys that sit next to one another? We have E and F and B and C that always sit together. They're 1 key away from one another. Why aren't they a sharp or flat? Well, F really is E sharp, and E is F flat. But almost all the time they're called by their original name as to not be confusing. From here, we're going to learn the C major scale. What is the C major scale? C is the first note we play, also known as the root note. When we play a scale, we also end it on the root note, but in the next octave. Scale tells us that we have a root note and need to walk across the keys in a special series of steps to move through the octave to get to the next root note. We can't just pick notes at random, it has to be in a specific order, otherwise it'll sound like noise. So we have to know the formula to follow. Major is a formula which tells us the notes we're allowed to play and which notes we have to step over to get to the next C note. It doesn't get any easier than the C major scale. We have 8 notes to find. The first and the last will be 2 C notes that are separated by an octave. This is why keyboards end on a C note, so you can complete the scale. We can choose any 2 C notes that are separated by an octave and find 6 remaining notes that bridge them. In C major, the scale is as easy as running your finger across the white keys from C to C. These notes sound good together. It sounds pleasant going from one C to the next because we're following a strict formula which is built into the keyboard, which I'll explain when we get into transposing music. But what would happen if we swap out a white key for a black one? It's out of place and kind of gross. It doesn't fit with the rest of the keys because it's not in the scale. Because the black notes don't belong to the C major scale, they're out of key, while the scale notes are in the key of C. Like with a major scale, we call it the key of C because C is the starting point. By having C as the root note, the other 6 notes in the scale will dance around it and our ears will always crave for us to land back on any C note. If I start playing the C major scale and don't finish on C, the scale feels like it's leaving us hanging. We have to hear that final C. This also works if I jump back down to the original C, or up to a higher C. Because of this special relationship our ears have with the root note, when we lay out the letters of C major in scale order, we can assign each letter a number to identify its scale degree. The scale degree is simply ranking the notes in order they were played, but with a little twist. If we lay out C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and then rank them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, we get the scale degrees. Scale degrees show us that in C major, C is first, D is second, E is third, F is fourth, G is fifth, A is sixth, B is seventh, and then we have the second C coming in eighth. This is why it's called moving up an octave, because the word octave basically translates to eighth. Our ears don't care if the root note is an octave higher or lower. They just want to hear the root note. So we change the last scale degree from an 8 to a 1. This makes all the C notes on the keyboard in the first degree. All the D notes are second. From here, we can see it's easy to tack on another second or third note, or even a whole octave. If you take your left hand, place your pinky on C, with D as your second, E as your third, F is your fourth, and G is your fifth. Play the keys in order: C, D, E, F, G. And once we reach the fifth, we're going to keep our thumb in place while pulling the rest of our hand over to place our middle finger on the sixth note, A. Then follow through with our index on B for our seventh note, and then our thumb ends the scale on a higher root note, the octave of C. That was walking up, or ascending the major scale. Now that we've made it to the top, we need to walk down, or descend. Keeping your thumb pressed down on the higher C, walk your index down to your seventh note, B, and middle finger to the sixth note, A, which you will need to keep pressed down as you tuck your thumb underneath your hand to get to your fifth note, G. From there, you can bring the rest of your hand back for your index to play F, middle finger on E, ring finger on D, and pinky back to the root note of C. To ascend with your right hand, start your thumb out on C for your root note, and play your index second, middle finger third, keep it pressed. Tuck your thumb under your hand onto the fourth note, swing your hand over to play index on the fifth, middle finger on the sixth, ring finger on the seventh, pinky on the higher octave of C. To descend, put your ring finger back on the seventh, middle on the sixth, index on the fifth, place your thumb on the fourth, keep it pressed, and pull your middle finger over to play the third, index on the second, and thumb back on the first. Scale degree is incredibly important for three things: chords, melody, and transposing. Chords are groups of 3 or more keys which we play at once to create a bigger, wider sound. This is a C major chord, and it is the most basic chord, called a triad. The word triad means that we're going to use 3 keys to make the major chord. It also tells us to use the notes which are in the 1st, 3rd, and 5th scale degrees. If we look down at the C major chord and count the keys that aren't touched, we have 5, with 3 on the left and 2 on the right. We can use this formula to find any other major chord without knowing the letters. We just have to choose a new root note. If we start on G, skip 1, 2, 3, this key will be the major third of G. Then we can skip 2 more, play the next key, and this is the perfect 5th of G. You could apply this to any key at a whim to make a major chord. We can do it again with any key at random. Without knowing the letter names, we can tell that this is the major third, and this is the perfect 5th. As long as we know to keep a total of 5 keys between our fingers, and keep the 3 on the left, we'll always find a major chord. We're not going to get in depth with minor scales or chords yet, but anywhere we make a major chord, we can make it into a minor simply by moving the major third to the left 1 key, and it becomes a minor third. Putting 2 keys between the 1st and 3rd, and 3 keys between the 3rd and 5th. When we're making a chord progression, we're limited to the notes of the scale. Anything else would be off key and sound out of place. We have 7 places we can start chords, and we're going to call each chord by its scale degree. But instead of using numbers to represent the chords, we're going to use Roman numerals. Some of the Roman numerals are lowercase, and others are uppercase. What's up with that? Since we can't capitalize numbers, and Roman numerals are made from letters, we can display the chords are either major or minor. We can start on the C major chord. From there, we move to the 2nd note in the scale degree. It's a D minor chord. As we've learned before, we can verify with 2 keys between the 1st notes and 3 keys between the 2nd notes. Moving from the 1 chord to the 2 chord in the key of C is actually so effortless, you don't really need to think about it. Take your hand and play C major. Keep your fingers in the same shape and shift your hand to the right 1 white key. You're playing D minor. To play our first progression, we should first play our 1 chord, follow it with a 2 chord, then jump back to 1, and then back up to 2. We're using C major because finding the correct chords is convenient. Choose a chord numeral, locate that key, then separate the next 2 keys with white keys. It's the only time we can really ignore the black keys. We could walk up the C major scale using chords like so. Let's start making the progressions more complex. While you could really choose any chords in any order you wish, we're going to walk through a few of the common progressions. The first would be 1, 5. It's a little bit more to think about because we have to jump a lot more keys, but finding the first note in the 5 chord is really easy. It's the last note in our 1 chord. All we have to do is keep our hand in the same shape, and play again with this key as a root note in the chord. But music is about conserving energy, and so far, our hands are jumping around a lot. This brings us to the next topic, and the next reason to understand scale degrees. Inverted chords use the idea of scale degree to allow us to flip the keys in a chord so we waste less energy playing. What do I mean? Let's go to the 1-5. At first, we were jumping around quite a bit to get back and forth. But what if we could flip some keys to make the jump smaller? We're going to keep the 1 chord the same, then move up to the 5 to see how we can invert it to make things smoother. We can take the major 5th and bring it down past the root into the next octave. Flipping this key brings us a bit closer to the 1 chord, so let's try this inverted 5 and shift back to the 1. It sounds pretty smooth. Let's compare. We can further invert the 5 chord by bringing the major 3rd past the root. This is an inverted 5 chord. However, if we bring the root note down, it's no longer inverted because all the notes are back to their original position. We can also invert the 1 chord by bringing the root note up, bring the 3rd up, and again, both are inverted chords. But if we bring the 5th back up, we're again at a normal 1 chord. When it comes to chord progressions, you can combine chords in any way that you please, but I provided some of the most common ones in the description. My favorite major progression is really easy and sounds rather nice. It's 1, 4, 5, 4, with the 4s and 5 inverted. It's as simple as this. Another thing we can do, instead of inverting the notes of the chord, is invert the chords in the progression. We'll invert the 4 and the 5 chords in the progression to have That's another neat trick you should also play with, but we're going to keep using and moving the melody. On one hand, chords are a great foundation for building a song. On the other, we can make a melody to make the song more interesting. If we put both hands on C major, we can play a 1 chord with our left hand. On the right, we also have the option to play a chord. Or we can play a melody. When we play a melody, we're going to stick to the notes in the scale. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Because 1, 3, and 5 are in the chord that the left hand is playing, they're called chord tones, and will sound really good in the melody because they complement the chord on the other hand. The other tones, 2, 4, 6, and 7, aren't part of the chord, so they're called non-chord tones, which contrast the root and chord tones. Once we start developing a melody, playing on the chord tones will sound closer to the root note, making them an extension of the root note, while the non-chord tones will create more tension and the desire to hear a chord tone or the root note. The 7th note will create the most dramatic tension because it's so far away from the original root while being right next to the other root. This isn't a ranking of how the notes sound, but it helps us know their relationship with one another, so when we start making a melody, we know which scale degrees are closest and furthest from home. If we play a melody with chord tones, it's going to sound solid. If we play with non-chord tones, it gets a bit shaky. A great melody can combine these elements to make the music engaging and more dimensional. Use this as a guideline to experiment with creating your own melodies over top some chord progressions. How will changing chords work with a melody, though? The chords and melodies are still part of the C major scale, so the scale degrees are most important. As our left hand moves to a 4 and a 5 chord, our ears still understand that we're in C major, so our right hand needs to treat C major as chord tones. If I have something simple like the progression and melody move through C major because that's how I'm playing. If we play this for a while, it can start to get boring. One step we could take to change things up would be to change the key of the song. We can do this by using one of the chords as the new root chord. For instance, if I play 1, 4, 5, and stick on 5, we can see that we're playing the scale degrees 5, 7, 2. We can also look to see that this is a G chord, because there's 3 keys between the first 2 notes, and 2 keys between these other 2 notes. We know it's a G major chord. We could turn this 5 into the new root chord, but how? Transposition. Transposing music means to switch into a new key. How do we do that? We already know this is the G major chord. We can tell by the way the keys between the notes are skipped, and it currently is the 5 and the 1, 4, 5 progression. We want to change this song into the key of G major, which would be the notes from the G major scale. This chord already tells us which notes are root, major third, and perfect fifth. What about the other 4? This is where we get to see the secret formula which I mentioned with the major scale. You'll be able to see how it's built into the keys. If we start at C major and go from scale degree 1 to 2, we skip 1 key. This is also known as a whole step. From 2 to 3, we skip another key. From 3 to 4, we don't skip any keys and call this a half step. From 4 to 5, we skip 1 key. 5 to 6, we skip 1. 6 to 7, we skip 1. 7 to 1, we skip none. We started with the C major scale because the formula allows us to only focus on the white keys for the scale, but now that we're changing keys, we're going to have to exchange white keys for black keys. The basic C major scale will stay overlapped on the keys down on this end, because it follows the major formula perfectly. On the other hand, I'm going to follow each step for finding the keys on my right hand, but starting on a different note. This will work for finding any major scale, allowing you to play in any major key. I'm not going to get in depth, but the minor scale is also built into the keyboard, and is as easy to navigate as C major. Go to an A key, and play all the white keys up to the A octave, and we will have the A minor scale. The first scale degree is A. We skip 1 key to get to the second scale degree. No keys are skipped to get to the third. Skip a key to the fourth. Skip a key to the fifth. Don't skip to the sixth. Skip to the seventh. And skip back to the root. Back to transposing. We can then take the right hand, make G the root note, and then follow the steps like so. We have 2 major differences, where we started and the 7th of the G major scale. Otherwise, they're all the same notes, just in a different order. We're playing all the white keys except for one, this one, which we swapped for this black key. Now let's make D major. Looking back at the C major setup, we choose D as the root note on the right. We have only one difference between G and D major, which again is the 7th. Transferring from C to G, then D, is going to sound relatively nice because they share so many common keys, which also made them easier to learn. How are we able to figure out which keys are related? The circle of fifths. When we were in C major, the easiest key to transition into was G, which was the 5th degree of C major. Once we were in G major, the 5th scale degree was D, and then we had another easy transition. We can continue to go from D and locate fifths until we come back to C. This builds the circle of fifths. It's a visual way to tell which keys are close to one another and which ones are further away. Some versions will also show you how many sharps and flats there are. If we look at C, we can see it's a fifth of F, and G is a fifth of C. Circle of fifths is a great way to see which keys share notes and which ones do not. Well, that's everything I know. Hope it helped.